Let's talk about Sesame Street, not necessarily the show as it is today, but the origins and how intentionality shaped what the show became. Also, how the show was catered to center Black and brown children in the inner cities, and how civil rights advocates created this show to be revolutionary. In the 1960s, America was in turmoil. Cities were burning, protests were constant, and the civil rights movement made it clear America was failing Black children. TV executives, advertisers, and networks weren't thinking about programming that centered Black and brown children or children in the inner city at all. But civil rights-minded activists, educators, and visionaries saw an opportunity. They asked the question, what if television can be used to educate children that the system was leaving behind? And that was the beginning of Sesame Street. The show's roots were unmistakably Black. The creators, people like Joan Gans Cooney and Lloyd Morissette, were deeply influenced by the civil rights movement. They brought in people like Dr. Chester Pierce, a Black psychiatrist who formulated how the show could be both entertaining and socially informative. They also brought in people like Dr. Evelyn Payne Davis. She was a civil rights organizer who worked closely with grassroots organizations. She wanted to make sure Sesame Street spoke to Black children and not at them. They made a choice. Sesame Street would be based on an urban setting. It would be modeled after neighborhoods like Harlem. They completely rejected the idea of the show being in suburbia. There was enough of that on TV. They wanted Black and brown children to see themselves represented in the inner city areas that they lived, on the stoops, in the music, in the brownstones, in the atmosphere. The entire show was designed to make sure that children that were left out of adequate early childhood education could start school on a relative equal footing. And they did it using music, humor, puppets, and community. And they didn't just reach English audiences either. In 1971, Sonia Manzano, better known as Maria, joined the show. Even her casting was with intention. She was from the Bronx, raised by Puerto Ricans. Through her role, she brought Spanish to children. She celebrated her culture. She made sure that Puerto Rican kids like herself felt like they belonged on the block too. Sesame Street was so revolutionary that Mississippi banned it. And the reason that they did it was because they showed Black and white children playing together. It wasn't until public backlash in 1970 that they allowed Sesame Street to be back on the air. When I look at what's being done with PBS now, with the funding cuts and things like that, and then I look at what PBS represents when they're intentional and they make sure that they get things right the first time by fact-checking and bringing on experts and making sure things are done appropriately for their audience. It really bothers me because on the opposite end, we just get brain rot. We have programs that are out there today where people just speak. They don't think, they just ramble and yap, and really their opinion is not based on any factual anything. It's just based on what they feel for the moment. It really makes me wonder where we're being pushed as a society when it comes to our thought processes. Because shows like Sesame Street weren't utopias where racism, poverty, and inequality didn't exist. They were places where those things were challenged. And when we don't teach people to challenge their situation or the status quo early, we're left with people who will accept the status quo forever.